So we have two guests with us this evening, Rob Schwartz and Dave Stokes. And we are, my brain hadn't done this before, so this is how my brain is starting to segment this work now, and so hopefully it makes some sense to others. We have a number of committee meetings that were on a calendar, and we have public input sessions in a couple of spots in that process. And so the first portion of this process has been committee and subcommittee work to look at belief statements that guide the next steps of this work, and there's been opportunity for public input there. Then the next segment will be really digging into the work and working on some recommendations, followed by some public input opportunities, and then some refining of that work following those commitments. So they're going to give us an update on this first portion of the work. So welcome, gentlemen.
Great. Good evening. We are so happy to be here. We have 18 slides. We're going to go through this fairly quickly in the sense that we wanted to leave you some information that when we're done with this update, you have something to understand when you go out to the public and they ask specific questions. You'll be able to reference some of the information that's going to really be the building blocks as we move through phase 2. And so Dave and I tonight will give you a little update of where things are.
I'm going to start with just giving you a quick review of some of the big picture components of the process. First of those are process roles, and every group that's listed on here has a defined role specifically for that group. And we continue to review these, again, very briefly when we have committee meetings, because I think it's important for people when they come in and engage the process at different points throughout several months, that if they're new to that engagement, then they have an understanding of what the roles are of each different group. The next slide is a graphic of, again, a 30,000-foot view of the process that we've identified and outlined to be followed. Each one of the gears represents a different stakeholder group. The largest gear in the center are students, and the goal is to make sure that they're college and career ready, obviously. The two orange gears are larger because they have a closer relationship with the students, and then finally the other smaller gears around it. And each one of those groups will interact in the process at different times. Some of them will be sometimes they'll be interacting together all at the same time, so all the gears are moving at the same time. Other times, maybe just one or two of the groups will be interacting with the process. Next, as we move through different phases and make decisions during each phase of the process, these three pillars are the focus for that decision making. Each one is talked about and discussed independently, but as we all know, they also all interact together as we look at that as for the focus and the philosophical basis for the decisions that are made within the different groups. Quick review of phase 1. As Brad indicated, we've had a couple of committee meetings. We've had 5 different subcommittees that have functioned. The goal for those subcommittees was to have those individual committee members that were in those different subcommittees to be resident experts in the content that was discussed, and then they could interact with the community members at large when the public input sessions, and then as we move into the second phase with more committee work, and those people will again interact with more of the committees. And with that, I'll pass it back to Rob.
And if I can talk a little bit about this part of the process, it was intentional that we would have the committee broken out into these subcommittees to exclusively work in one of the parameters of these 5 subcommittees. So is it on the finance, the teaching and learning, the new schools, closing and repurposing, whatever that was, the intent was that they would become knowledgeable. So when we come back together and we interdisperse the persons that were on these subcommittees in the whole of the committee, they will be experts to guide some of the conversation when we start talking about these holistically together what will this mean for Cedar Rapids schools? So I wanted to be specific on that because I think some of the committee members, maybe some people out in the public, what we heard at the survey, the public inputs was, why are we working exclusively just on one issue? Aren't these interactively with others? And I see
And
a
I think,
question.
Rob, you're right. We're hearing that there's some concern about the siloing of some of those subcommittees, that they don't understand the fuller picture of this, or they have, and I don't know how broad that is, but I'm glad that you mentioned that so that it does come back to fit into a bigger picture.
Absolutely. We've mentioned to the committee it's like building a house. Right now we're building the foundation, and things seem to go very slow. If you look at when a house is being built, the concrete's there, why aren't they doing anything? Well, as we move into phase 2, you're going to see a lot of things that move toward what are possible solutions. And that's kind of a nice segue here in a moment. Some other things that we wanted to comment on in relation to where we've been in this first phase with the subcommittees is we had these public input sessions, so one at each of the high schools. We had some very good conversation. As I look out here, I see a couple of our committee members are out here as well, so thank you for coming. We had a survey, and there was a lot of confusion on the survey. And so I think there was a lot of lessons learned with the district, with RSP, even as we go into tomorrow night with the committee, some other things that will be gleaned from this, that when we go back into the April public inputs, we'll have survey questions that will be more in line with maybe the expectations the community has. What we have is RSP, the board, and most definitely administration. So there are some information that we can get from the survey. Today, right before we got into this meeting, I saw we had another dump of data that breaks out into the different subgroups of who answered the survey. So there's some things that we can glean from this that I feel will be valuable into the process. We also know that there's some takeaways with that survey of some of the learning experiences, what those spaces could look like. So all of that will come into play as we move into the next committee meeting. So with that, we go into phase 2, and I've blown this up. If you remember, this process is on 11 by 17. So tonight is just here's what happened in phase 1. So now we're moving into phase 2, and this is where there's going to be some very deliberate activities that will move forward. What does this look like for elementary schools? This could be things about your existing inventory of these 21 elementary buildings. What, is it 21? What is the grade configuration? All of these different things that will be a part of the implementation, which is phase 3. As you can see here, there's a mixture of different boxes. We have the blue, which you is on the Board of Education. If you remember back in August, we were very deliberate in this process creation to have you the opportunity to provide some feedback of where things are. So when I'm done with this presentation, we look forward to some of those comments that you may have. The green is the committee. The orange are the public inputs. And then you can see as we get into September, we have 2 board meetings. And if you remember, the reason we have those 2 board meetings is there likely, potentially could be a change in who is on the board. And we wanted to have whoever the new board is the opportunity to hear all of the work that has transpired over this roughly 13 months when we get to that point. So some key elements that are in this process. One thing that's exciting that we're finalizing the logistics on is the tours. So we're going to have some tours of existing buildings here in Cedar Rapids, some buildings that I believe are in Linn-Mar and College Community, but then we're also going to have a tour where we go down to Kansas City where we're going to see 2 districts that are farther along in their process of what their facility master plan would be, with very similar challenges that you have. And so whoever gets to go on that tour will be able to see how they went through their process, what they're doing to their buildings, and how you get this awesome 21st century learning environment in buildings that are old buildings. Does that mean renovating them? Does that mean knocking them down, building them up? Different things of that nature. So there'll be a lot of good hands-on visuals through this process. The interaction we've had with all of the districts, whether they're the neighboring districts here or these districts in Kansas City, they want to show off their buildings. They want you to see what learning looks like today in some of these newer facilities. Again, ultimately, when we get to the public input sessions in April, we will have some different scenarios of what this could look like. How are all these building blocks coming together? Some other data sets, go ahead.
Sorry
Question?
to interrupt, but so I love the idea of these tours. As part of the tours, I know the audiences that are part of the subcommittees. Would there be an opportunity for current district students as a group, or recent young alumni, or even a group of parents to go along as part of this? I know we have representatives from a lot of groups, but just in terms of the excitement or the energy behind those groups that are so key and, as you said, are kind of central to this process, would that be even a possibility?
That's something we'll toss over to Dr. Buck
Okay.
on how those logistics may work with whether they can get out of school, getting on the bus, all that type of stuff. But it could be a possibility.
All right.
Great question. And other board members, if you have questions as we go through, feel free to jump in. If I see your hands going up, I'll call on you. Some other information that we've included that are going to be some of those benchmarks, guidelines through this process. This is an enrollment table. So when you look at this presentation, this shows by grade what the enrollment is. We've been hearing a lot of those type of requests for people to understand, well, what is happening in the district with enrollment. So this gives you that understanding with the data that we're doing your projections with. How does this then relate? And so we have that pig and the snake and so on. And we're not going to talk a lot about that. Here I'll have Dave talk about this one a little bit.
Yeah, we summarized your financial information for the Finance Subcommittee, really focused on the potential dollars available through bond issues or the 1 cent local option sales tax, or, as we know, the possibility of the 1 cent local option sales tax. But again, as we mentioned when we were talking about ACE, you know, this, we always talk about philosophy running headlong into pragmatism. So that's where what we want to do educationally meets up in Steve Graham's office with what we have available to do with what we want to do.
And the reality of this slide is we've heard some people say, well, why don't we just build all new buildings? Well, can't do that, right? The monetary issue is what would control that. So we also want there to be something that's left that we're building on a good foundation. And so if we go back to that 2012, 2013 time periods, there were these forced student or forced school options of some of the criteria that would be considered on what you need to do in a facility master plan back in 12-13. The value of this and the belief statements that have come out of these 5 subcommittees is at this next meeting, this is where they cross over, and we'll see the correlation, we'll see things pare down to a more manageable number of criteria, guidelines to be able to get to this end process in April of what are we thinking the possible solutions can be. Just rolling. So when we get to phase 3, this is really the most unknown part of our process. And if you remember, we talked about this at the start of the process, is what we'll know we need to do at the end is going to determine how we've built this foundation, what comes through phase 2. So how extensive can it be is going to be on this pillars of ACE. So what are we going to try to do with some of the academics? What are some of these cultural elements that will move things here and there? We heard from an excellent program here tonight. So how do some of those things start to influence how we look at these buildings and the need of those buildings, looking at those funding, the economics over the next 5-10 years? So the implementation will know more as we get to April on what that could look like on this end. Is it something that you have to go out for a bond referendum? Do we hear something from the legislature that you can extend your SAVE funds? How much would that be? Is there some allowable growth? Those type of elements will start to factor into what we may need to do when we get to the end of this process in October. So with that, we open up with other questions. I've left on this slide some of those key dates that we wanted you to be aware of. Our next committee is tomorrow night. Our next board meeting to report back to you is on April 10th. And then we have public input sessions that follow the next 3 evenings of the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. likely will be a similar format to what we did before. We'll also have a survey, and we're working out some of those logistics with K-12 Insight. So again, we don't run into some of the challenges that we did on this initial survey that we had last month.
Questions from the board? Gary?
Just a quick comment. I want to compliment the chairs of your subcommittees. I attended several of the public input, and the chairs were running those subcommittees. Enthusiastic, knowledgeable, committed to the process. Just some great individuals, and it was great to see their enthusiasm and the public input at those meetings. So a good start.
Any other comments, questions? I do want to reiterate, as I attended a couple of the sessions, you really came out at the beginning and made sure that the public understood that this was a blank piece of paper. You know, we as a board, as a district, aren't coming in and with preconceived notions or ideas, and I think that that transparency just needs to continue through this, because we really are open. We know you've done the study, and with Shive Hattery helped us understand building needs and things from 2012, but things have changed. There's a lot of new opportunities out there, and so we really are open to everything. So again, I think for the public to understand that is really critical in this process. So thank you for mentioning that at all of your sessions with the public. All right. With that, we appreciate what you're doing, and thank you so much for all your effort with this as well.